Well, hello. My name is Tim Greiving. I'm a film music journalist, and I'm so thrilled to be here in this room of Film Music House at Sundance Film Festival to moderate this 10-year retrospective conversation with the immensely talented composer, orchestrator, and conductor, and my friend, Joseph Trapanese. Welcome,
Good to
Joe.
be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
It is fun to have a reason to look back on 10 years of work.
Yeah, it feels like I just got here, so it's kind of weird how time goes by, isn't it?
It is. So the occasion, of course, is that Joe has been kind of on the Hollywood film scoring scene for about a decade, really kicking off with the incredible hit soundtrack for Tron Legacy, which you collaborated with Daft Punk on. But before we dive into your scores, kind of in order for this conversation, I want to lay the groundwork just a little bit. So, what is the very short version of how you got into film scoring?
Well, I jokingly say I have a very boring story because it's very traditional. I had musical training. I went to Manhattan School of Music, which is where I learned orchestration and arranging and, really deep set of skills. Had great music teachers growing up. I was very fortunate that even though I went to a public school, I went to some public schools that had really great music teachers present that pushed me to excel. So I'm really grateful for that. And then I moved to LA and I became an intern, and there's so many like that who move out here and try to become an intern and try to, make it in film scoring. But I feel that because of the weird set of skills that I had, which was that classical music background, but also I was always the kid in the basement playing with synthesizers, that those two things kind of met up in LA, and it was here that I realized, oh, like these two skills are actually exactly what's necessary to be a film composer. You need to have a great understanding of the technology in order to deliver cues and deliver mock-ups and to run a studio like this. But then film music always uses acoustic, or almost, I shouldn't say always, but oftentimes needs acoustic instrumentation for the power and the beauty that live musicians can bring. So having both those skill sets was really, I think, the key to me kind of being able to excel in this industry when I was quite young.
Well, speaking of hybrids between machine and orchestra, um, Tron Legacy came along pretty early in your career. It's such a how did you get such a plum gig kind of right out of the gate working with Daft Punk?
Well, as with anything in life, a lot of luck is involved. So definitely tip my hat towards luck, but I also have to tip my hat to people like Chris Beck, incredible composer, best known for the Frozen series, but so many, many more. Such a long career. And I worked with him for a little while as an additional assistant. His brother is Chili Gonzalez, the incredible uh, uh, crazy and incredibly talented artist who lives in Europe, who is basically a classical pianist and rapper all in one, and he does that together on stage. He's really incredible. If you're not familiar with his work, please do check it out. But he knows Daft Punk, and so when Daft Punk came to LA, they met with Chris just to talk about film scoring, and Chris said, "Oh, you should hire Joe," and so they hired me, and that's where I was. And the people at Disney, the incredible executives and producers involved with the movie, didn't put up much of a fight and let me do it and supported me the whole time. So somehow we made it to the end of it. I thought we were going to get fired any day, but I just worked my tail off to try not to try to deliver great music and not get fired.
That's a pretty sweet way to kind of kick down the door on a career. But I mean, so you say like talent mixed with luck, mixed with who you know, mixed with right place, right time. But what did you feel like you had in your toolkit that you could really bring to that experience of collaborating with Daft Punk? What do they need from you?
Well, one, I was young and cheap, so it was a grand experiment that we were hired really early on before there was even a script. I remember being in the studio with Daft Punk when they were delivered a copy of the script, so there was just the idea of Tron and Daft Punk, so it was very early, so I was affordable, they could hire someone early on, and I was young and impressionable, which was very important to Daft Punk. They did not want to hire someone who was just in the LA scoring scene for decades and would say, "Oh, this is how you do it." Like they wanted to be able to control the situation. So that's where me being young and new was good, but at the same time, they wanted someone who had a thorough knowledge of the orchestra and orchestration. And through my background being at a music conservatory, having examples of my orchestrations and arrangements and classical music on hand, they realized that, oh, this is someone who could synthesize those things together. Even though he's quite young, he has had quite a bit of experience for his age. It's crazy looking back on it that I was 24 when I got that gig. It's just I need to knock on all the wood in the world, to appreciate that.
The soundtrack was a huge hit. I mean, literally on the charts and sales wise and everything. And now it's kind of it kicked off like a renaissance of a kind of score, or I think it was such an influential score, and now it's kind of considered a bona fide classic 10 years later. And being so young, did you kind of just like flash the Tron like album as you walked in the door and people would kind of lay out the red carpet for you?
No, definitely not. I think I think one of the great things about being a film composer is that you could remain fairly anonymous, but at the same time, like I'm a very humble guy. I don't like being flashy, as my friends can attest to. So, you know, at the same time, though, having that on my resume, it did, in a sense, it did exactly that. All of a sudden, I was meeting studio executives, I was meeting producers, I was meeting more musicians. That's how I met Mike Shinoda, from Linkin Park, who invited me to score the raid with him. He saw Tron in the theater and said, "Okay, Daft Punk is awesome. I know that, but how did they actually do this?" And kind of just found out who I was. So, on one sense of the word, no, but at the other sense of the word, you're exactly right. Having that under my belt really just it flung open the doors. And I'm one to hate saying, "Oh, this is my big break" or something, because I feel like you work your entire life to get big breaks. There's all sorts of breaks along the way, but it really was the thing that opened the door, like you said.
And you quickly became, among other things, a go-to guy for bands or artists who didn't have experience scoring films, to kind of like guide them and help, be the other piece of the puzzle and bringing like a cinematic score to life. So why do you, I mean, you kind of touched on this, but why do you think you are so adept at that role of kind of holding hands with an artist who doesn't traditionally score films and making a film score with them?
When I was at Manhattan School of Music in New York, I really did feel like the black sheep. I really felt like I didn't really fit in with, um, the avant-garde, quote unquote, obviously, the avant-garde classical music scene. I was someone who really was interested in jazz. I grew up loving hip hop music. I wanted to write film music. I had all these different influences and different things that I was open to. And it was really interesting to be in a place that was actually very closed-minded in terms of the way it thought about music. And it was a great place to be in terms of learning classical repertoire and stuff like that. But also stylistically, it was a very closed-minded place. So that was a bit of a tension for me. But when I got to LA, what was so great about being out here was there's so many different kinds of music mingling together. And so that naturally curious, open mind that I had really felt at home here in LA. And I think that really is the main key towards my collaborations, is that I walk into the room curious. I walk into the room eager to learn. And while obviously I'm confident enough to know what I can bring to the table and share with the artist, I'm equally curious about what they're bringing to the table. And I do want to emphasize too that the cool thing about film scoring that I really love is that, yes, music is super subjective, but there's something not subjective that we're talking about, which is the filmmaker's vision. And is this music serving the emotional journey that the filmmaker is looking for. And so I guess that's part of the process, is collaborating with the artist, but also shepherding it to a place where you're trying to achieve what the filmmaker is trying to achieve. So it kind of, yes, there are times when everything gets political in filmmaking, producers, studios, notes, all this stuff. But that's something that helps me sleep at night, is that there's something completely apolitical, which is, hey, we're making a movie. Is this movie, are we feeling what we want to feel in this scene? And so it kind of removes, for me, that removes all the drama and politics out of it. So it makes me, I feel, a better collaborator, because that's what I focus on. I focus on the movie, focus on the emotional journey.
One of the legacies of Tron Legacy, that it began your collaboration with Joe Kosinski, and you guys reteamed for Oblivion, this time with M83. How was that experience different from working with Daft Punk on Tron?
I quickly realized how unique Tron was when, I looked at Daft Punk's calendar and there was nothing. They became film composers, and so they built a studio, and just focused on film scoring for that 2 years. They were like, we are scoring Tron, we're becoming film composers, and so that was really noble of them. And I think what was so equally interesting, but in a very different way, obviously, was while we were doing Oblivion, Anthony's career as a pop artist was really at its peak. He was, Midnight City was all over the radio, and so he was pulled on tour so much that it was a new challenge. The new challenge was, here was an artist who was having to serve both sides of the coin. He had to create music for a film, but also be that pop artist on stage. And it was really fun for me. I got to, go to Central Park and conduct an orchestra with his band, and which ultimately led to, after Oblivion, we performed at the Hollywood Bowl together. So there's all this amazing stuff that I got to do because of my association with Anthony in the pop world, but it also made the film itself really challenging. And Anthony actually wrote about how, he was really not prepared for the amount of notes and the amount of collaboration, the amount of feedback that we'd be getting. And he very much, he even said to me at one point, this is my next album. And we had a long talk about that. I said, Anthony, this isn't your next album. This is a film score. Like, we have to focus on the film scoring element. That is the most important thing, not the album element of it. So it was a really interesting journey for me to have to step up in a way that I hadn't had to step up with Tron. And in retrospect, Tron was easy. I just showed up to Daft Punk studio every day, worked my butt off, and they dealt with, the politics of the situation. They dealt with Joe and Joe Kosinski and Disney and the idea of, making a film score. And I was just kind of a fly on the wall, learning and contributing. And when we got to Oblivion, I really had to step up. And because of my relationship with Joe Kosinski, that's where I wasn't able to step up, because now it was my second film with this filmmaker. So he invited me to step up. And rather than have a studio like Daft Punk did at a separate space, I actually built a little studio at Editorial on Oblivion. And I was there every day with Joe Kosinski and the editor, kind of because Anthony couldn't be there every day. He was touring. So I had to kind of, even more so, get into the production versus something like Tron, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I want to throw to a clip from Oblivion, and then we could talk about the score a little more. This is a scene of Tom Cruise and Olga Kurylenko, I'm not sure I'm saying her name right, doing some futuristic flying, and then we can talk more about it.
Jack, I'm sorry. Lightning. That's the plan.
nice of them to just drop out all the sound and let your music take over.
Yeah, I think that must have been an edit I made for my website. So, like
Oops,
just
oops, let the music shine. Um, so because of that situation where you're required to do a little bit more, to step up a little more, did you feel like you got to contribute more artistically to that score, or put more of your own stamp on it?
Definitely. I think, for those of us in the industry, the line between composition and arranging is so gray and wide. There's so many arrangers who contribute to the composition and composers contribute to the arrangement. So, I try to be easygoing about that, but definitely on Oblivion, I was contributing a lot as a composer, so yeah, like Anthony really fought to have that credit for me to share that, to indicate that, how this came together, and I think that was as much for me as it was for him to say, hey, he kind of realized this is not an M83 record, so I'm going to kind of make sure I share credit and indicate that wasn't pure M83, if that makes sense. I think that was the thinking behind it. But yeah, it was exciting to step up for Joe like that. I think that was the most exciting thing for me to work for a filmmaker and help deliver something, and help achieve his vision, because I've been working from the beginning to help him achieve his vision. And if we got fired, which we definitely came close to at several points, he would have had to been shoved, someone else would have been shoved on him, and he would have less control over the score. So, at the end of the day, that's what I'm proud of. I'm really proud I was able to step up for Joe and deliver.
And we'll come back to Joe, but prior to Oblivion, you had your first big Sundance moment with The Raid, and you did Raid 2, again, collaborating with another artist. What was cool about working on those films?
Oh, so much, like something I think people don't realize is how much work Gareth, the filmmaker, and his team put into the choreography of those films. So before a frame was shot, they had rehearsed for months these fight scenes. So oftentimes I'll get asked like, "Oh, how do you score a fight scene like that when the music is so groovy, and the fight is very rhythmic?" And to me, it's like a ballet, and it almost is a ballet since they've worked so hard choreographing things. There is an internal rhythm to each action scene, to each fight scene. So once I, as a composer, tune into that rhythm, the cue becomes much easier to write because it's just naturally following. And to even further that, Gareth would shoot those rehearsals on a small video camera and then immediately edit them in the computer. So it was not just rehearsing the fight scenes, he was rehearsing how he was going to actually edit those fight scenes. So it's really fascinating to think of how hard they worked on those films, and I think obviously it comes through in the reality of what the film was.
You've done a lot of action since those movies. Do you feel like you learned tricks or methods or things that you still use today on those films, or is each case so different?
Oh, yeah, a little bit of both. Each movie you have to tune into what's unique about that film, for better or worse. Each film is different, so you want to tune into what's unique and let that drive you and help you be unique with your score. But you're exactly right in the sense that what you learn on one film is going to translate directly to another film. So yes, like just watching that Oblivion clip right now, I think I did a good job covering up any cringing I was doing. But there's so much I would do differently now. Um, it's 8 years or so since Anthony and I wrote that music, so that's 8 years of experience, and things I would do better. And a lot of that almost has to do too with the mixing of sound design and dialogue and music. I think I've gotten a lot better at writing around those elements. That, yeah, I hope you didn't see any cringing when we were watching that.
No, we were just scratching your nose. So you got so good and developed this reputation of being a really helpful collaborator. What's the first score you wrote kind of on your own, that you feel like was your sort of your coming out party as a solo film composer?
It's funny. While I respect that question, I think it's a good question. I also say none of them because, I think what's funny about what we do is it's all a collaboration. It's never a singular vision of mine, nor should it ever be because I'm not a filmmaker in that regard. But I know what you're asking, and I think the first film that I really kind of feel, there's so many that I've been lucky to work on, but the first film that really comes to mind in that regard is Earth to Echo, a filmmaker who generationally I was really lined up with. We're about the same age, Dave Green and I, and so we saw the same films growing up that inspired Earth to Echo. It was with Disney, so it was kind of in a safe place. I had grown up at Disney as on Tron Legacy, so I was with the same executives, with the same music team, who had fostered me, and I knew all these executives. So they would, when they came to my studio, it wasn't as stressful as other films where, hey, this is maybe the first time I'm working with this executive. I don't have that relationship. So I feel like while there are definitely others I could point to, and so many filmmakers who've helped birth me, so to speak, that one definitely feels like a real mark in the ground, if I were to say so, especially because I was able to really combine the orchestra and synthesizers in a way that I found interesting. I was able to orchestrate every note of that score. I think, one of the regrets I have being older and busier is that I don't get to sit down and orchestrate everything, and I have incredible orchestrators I work with, but it's interesting when, you have to let go some of that control to allow yourself to be a better composer, if that makes sense. But it is fascinating in that regard. But yes, Earth to Echo, quick answer.
Good. That's a good segue. As you mentioned, it's kind of this throwback, kind of retro classic tale, but told in a contemporary found footage style. Did the contemporary style affect your approach to how you scored it?
Yes and no, and that is a great question, because obviously it's a found footage film, more or less. My mom called me after seeing it and said, "I don't understand. I felt a little sick when I was watching it." And it's essentially, we made the movie as if it was made by the kids. At the same time, though, that on one hand, so when Dave came to me and we talked about the film, Dave said, I wanted to do this without music because it's a found footage film. Where are these kids getting the music? They don't have access to, Hans Zimmer's music library. They're not just going to throw that in there. But at the same time, we realized in order to get that sweeping sense of adventure that Dave wanted to achieve, which again, our references being E.T., Goonies, movies of the 80s that we grew up with, we needed that sweeping score. We needed the music to kind of hold our hand. And that, you could cast that as a bad thing. Oh, we're relying on music to guide the audience. But in that film, I think it's a great thing that the score really helped guide the audience through this film, which without music could have been a little bit more confusing because of the nature of how it was shot.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the Alfred Hitchcock quote about where the orchestra is, and
Well, and you know what Bernard Herrmann said back to him, right?
Yeah, where's the camera?
Exactly. It's a great story.
It's all artifice. Even the found footage ones are artificial. You need music. I want to play a clip from this, which will give us a sense of the style of the film, but also your score. This takes place in a junkyard, I believe. So let's watch a clip from Earth to Echo.
What is that?
Here he goes.
Back up. Get ready. Okay, now.
Where are we going?
Home! The ship's in Mulberry Woods.
Thanks, buddy. I need an Advil. We can't afford this right now. We really can't afford this right now. Dude, look! There's a new map! What? Here, give me the phone back.
I think that's his ship.
Whoa, that's a big ship.
Alex, don't want to stress you out or anything, but they're right there!
Oh my God.
Alex, it's your mom. Don't answer it. Why would I answer it? Betty?
I'm having to kind of skip over some of the stuff in your career, but I did want to ask you about Straight Outta Compton from 2016, which was a massive hit film. And you obviously have all this iconic hip hop music that's part of the story for that. So what was your role as the composer of that film in that case?
Yeah, it's amazing to think of. I remember when I got the email, I was like, "Hey, Joe, we're gonna put you up for this film. Are you interested?" And so many emotions like came forward at that time because hip hop really was, thanks to my cousin who I brought to the premiere, my older cousin. That was the music I grew up with. That was the music I listened to before I listened to film music. I listened to hip hop, and so the idea that I was up for this movie was just incredible. And when I got the movie, friends asked me like, "Oh, you're gonna write a hip hop score?" And I was like, yeah, no, like Dr. Dre already did that with the music. Like I'm not writing hip hop, that's his world. So, I made sure, through my talks with F. Gary Gray, incredible inspired filmmaker who I loved working with, um, through my talks with him, we quickly established that the score had to be the soul of these characters, that it was the kind of the more vulnerable side, because hip hop is all bravado, it's exciting, it has so much swagger, but obviously these men had a lot of challenges that they faced in their lives, and so the music had to represent that, the score had to represent that, and most importantly, I got a great comment from the head of Universal Pictures who came in to watch the movie, and she said, "Oh, the score is transparent," and that was my goal, because the Dr. Dre, NWA, Ice Cube, that's the star of the movie. That music is the star of the movie, and what they did with Harvey Mason Jr. in terms of having to recreate some of the masters, it really is incredible what they did, and it was an honor to be there to watch that. And my job was to really just be the connective tissue that helped thread this story through these iconic songs. It was incredible.
And now I have to ask you about what's probably my personal favorite film of yours, which is Only the Brave, another Joe Kosinski film, which I rewatched last night just to kind of get it fresh in my mind. And when it wasn't tugging my heart or making me want to buy a horse ranch in Arizona, it was punching me in the stomach repeatedly. But it's a real life, very tragic, beautiful drama, and a very different score from your previous stuff with Joe. What was the heart of that score for you?
Something I've learned as I've gotten older, I don't know if it's learned or just kind of started to do, is I try to find the way into a film. I try to find that inspiring vision that helps me really understand what a score is going to be. And for that film, there's one survivor from the group of firefighters. His name is Brendan. And I knew early on that Joe wanted to have a guitar-driven score, because these firefighters, they listen to country music, American music, a lot of guitar-driven music. So it was very important that it was guitar-driven. I'm not a guitar player, so I had to figure out how I was going to do this. And Brendan, I imagined Brendan, if he was a guitar player, I imagined like visiting him at his house and kind of, him sitting on his bed with a guitar and just playing me a quiet song about his fallen brothers. And so that kind of helped inspire me with what this score was going to be like. And in fact, one of the earliest sessions we had is went to a studio, put up a really incredible mic at one end of the room, and at the other far end of the room, I had an incredible guitar player just play very quietly the theme I had written. And we turned the gain of the microphone up, so you get all this kind of ambient room noise along with this guitar, and it really it gave the impression of you were in this intimate space with this guitar player who was telling you this beautiful story. And I think that matched with, we went to London to record strings. In this old church, and we put the violins up in this, like, what they call the gallery area at Air Studios, which is the old church. And it was like these angels singing down above you with this guitar. And I think that was really one of the earliest film scores I did, where I just saw the power of that musical imagery and what it can do. And that's something I've tried to apply moving forward, that each score I work on has perspective. And I think the danger in film music is that we fall into tropes. Film composers, we like to talk about our templates. We have an orchestral template. We open up and we have all our instruments there, and we just start banging away notes in this template. And I've always found, yes, that's helpful to have the orchestra sitting there, but I find that every score I work on kind of has to have a new template for me to create sounds with, and that's kind of how I get inspired. So, long answer to your question of, let's talk about that movie a little bit, but yeah, that was a big kind of breakthrough for me as I guess an artist, if I were to be bold enough to call myself an artist.
It's such a gorgeous score. It's probably my favorite thing you've written. It's like a meditation. I want to play a clip. This is from the epilogue, so it does spoil it a little bit, but if you haven't seen the film, you need to watch it anyway. But here's a little taste of your score from it. Only the Brave. So good. You do nothing else from this conversation, please go watch it.
I'm really proud of that. I really am proud of that one. That was one of the few movies and projects I look back on and I cringe less than other ones, in the sense of, what I do differently and better. I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, you should be. Well, in the little time we have left, I want to talk about some of the more recent stuff you've done. In a very different kind of mode is Lady and the Tramp, which is this classic Disney tale we all know, set in Louisiana. So you got all these kind of rich, candy-colored, nostalgic flavors. And I know you got involved in that early on, right? I mean, there's music baked into the story.
That was, I got so lucky on that one because Charlie Bean, the filmmaker, we had worked together on Tron Uprising, the animated series, which, of course, I could trace back to my time with Daft Punk. So Charlie and I have known each other for years, and he's an old neighbor of mine too. So we're in the same neighborhood, and we go down to this bar called the Drawing Room every once in a while, this divey bar. And so we went there to talk about Lady and the Tramp, and we were talking about kind of what we spoke about in terms of Only the Brave. What's the viewpoint of the music, and something we spoke a lot about was what the presence or what character of music was there around the time that film takes place, which is the 1910, 1913, 1915, somewhere in that area. And if you think about music at the time, it's early jazz, so Black American music. It is also live. To have a record player at that time, you had to be a fairly wealthy person. Record player cost about as much as a Model T at that point. So not everyone has recorded music. Music was very alive. People had pianos in their houses. So that led them to Jim Deere and what's the name? I forget the two names. I know the names of the actors because I got to work with them because they're so fantastic. Kiersey and Thomas. They sang, they played instruments on screen. It led to this very vibrant musical presence in the film, and to really capture that and be authentic. Again, a story where Disney has supported me so incredibly. They took us to New Orleans. We worked with some musicians who half of them couldn't read music, and when I say that, I say that as a compliment, because these are musicians who, when they were 2-3 years old, someone put a sousaphone in their hands and said, "You're going to play sousaphone." And so these musicians live, eat, sleep, breathe this authentic Black American music from that period. So in a way that I could never comprehend as someone who has been quote unquote trained in a music conservatory with notation out the wazoo, that sort of thing. And so we went there with the classic songs like He's a Tramp. We had some new material, and we basically asked them, let's interpret He's a Tramp as a standard of that era. And so they just started playing, and I just remember sitting in that studio booth just with my mouth, trying to hold my jaw up from the floor, because these musicians were just so incredible. And so it lends this authenticity and uniqueness. And also, I don't know, what's interesting about the original film, the original Lady and the Tramp, everything is so 50s in the film, even though the film takes place in the teens, so it was something we wanted to almost rectify in a way. We said, okay, we want this film takes place here. We want it to represent the actual music of that era. So that's what we did. And it was amazing to have access to the original Lady and the Tramp archives at Disney. It was another pinch me moment, so to speak, of my time here in LA.
Apropos of nothing, I'm sitting here next to my window and I have a ring light, and it looks like I'm in like a Gordon Willis noir film. So I apologize for the.
No, it's great. I love it. The very American noir film.
I'm gonna get real dark now, Joe.
Excellent.
One of your most hot off the presses scores is Spontaneous, which is a very unique movie. Not your average high school rom-com. Can you talk about that story and how you figured out how to navigate the crazy tonal shifts in that film?
Oh gosh, yeah. There are. I feel like there are about 10 million ways to do that film wrong, and about 3 or 4 ways to do it correctly. And Brian Duffield is someone I knew, or I've known for years now, because he wrote Insurgent. He was the writer, and he's very close with Dave Green and other filmmakers I've worked with. So we've known each other for a while, and I hit him up on Twitter. I said, "Hey, do you have a composer for your movie? I'd love to work with you." I remember I went out to Burbank to meet him on I think you might remember this. It was it 2017? I guess it was the hottest day in LA like ever. It was like 122 degrees in the valley, and we were sitting down having like iced coffees in the commissary over in Burbank, and just talking about Spontaneous. And I think the way I approached it musically was to, gosh, I haven't thought about this too hard in a while, because that film took like 2 or 3 years to finish because it changed hands so often. It was weird. It started at like, I forget where it started. It was like Awesomeness, which was at Universal, and then Universal sold Awesomeness. So like by the time we got to recording the score early last year, it was like it was this whirlwind. But kind of like Only the Brave, I wanted this sense of intimacy, this idea of the music coming from this teen perspective of drama and this emotional falling in love for the first time, that sort of thing. That was really important to me. That I didn't want the music to come from the perspective of everything's exploding and we're gonna die. I wanted the music to come from the perspective of I'm a teenager falling in love for the first time, and everything's also fucked up. That's I guess that's the part of it. You know, I think how ironic it is that we're having this not ironic or timely, we're having this conversation today on inauguration day in 2021 when we were making spontaneous the idea of, you know, Trump being president and things being, you know, everything being terrible. That was something that pervaded the mood of both the film itself as well as the atmosphere we made the film in. But that was the idea going into it. Also guitar-driven score. Also something that yeah, I just wanted to kind of sit on your shoulder and just kind of make you feel like you were a kid again.
I like it. I'm gonna ask you one more question, and setting aside that you do have a film at Sundance, Prisoners of the Ghostland with Nicolas Cage. Can't get into that, but to sort of like look back at 10 years of scoring with everything you've done, what is it about putting music to moving images or to a cinematic story that you still like gets you up in the morning and that excites you?
Yeah, call me old fashioned, but it's that being in a dark room and being on a journey. You know, that you know, you go into a dark room and you get on a spaceship and you go somewhere else. And I think that is something that it'll be so interesting in the coming years. As you know, I've done as many Netflix films as I have you know, other films now, it seems, you know, so it's definitely interesting to see how that changes. But also I don't there it doesn't change the idea that, you know, you are going on this journey, that's something that will be ever present in what I do. And that's what makes me so excited, that I am part of this magic show that, you know, sometimes I like to think that the normal person will never know I exist because I'm just part of this magic show, and I arrive, I help do the magic trick, and then I disappear, you know, and I think that that is something that I get a kick out of too, that I'm part of something bigger than me, that this studio is just one little piece of this magical puzzle that comes together.
Like it. I know that just kind of scratches the surface of 10 years, but it's a nice sampling of your work. So I want to thank Sundance. I want to thank Film Music House, White Bear PR, and I want to thank you, Joe, for this fun conversation. And
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This is great.